The phone rang precisely at 5:02 a.m., waking security guard Joe Nelson. He slowly rose from his chair, yawned, and reached for the radio to respond to the call. Strangely enough, the security system at the Midlothian church, located on the outskirts of town, had triggered at a time when nothing should be happening. This place rarely experienced any emergencies, especially at such an hour when even the earliest birds were still dozing. "Central, what's going on?" he asked, covering his mouth with his hand to stifle another yawn. "Movement inside the building," the dispatcher replied coldly. "Check the cameras." Joe put on his headphones, clicked a few buttons on the monitor, and pulled up the camera feeds on the screen. The church was empty, only darkness and a series of stone walls, illuminated by the flickering of streetlights outside the windows. But on one of the cameras, positioned in the main hall, something flickered. Nelson squinted at the screen. A figure, a person, dressed in heavy tactical gear, helmet, vest, elbow pads, and what shocked Joe the most, there were police badges on the uniform. "What the hell?" he muttered, zooming in on the image. The person, wearing a mask and helmet, seemed to move without a sound. He walked slowly along the walls, occasionally touching doorknobs or peeking into open rooms. This wasn't an ordinary break-in. Joe noticed how the man carefully examined every detail as if looking for something specific, moving confidently and methodically, as though he knew the layout of the cameras and patrol routes perfectly. Joe's fingers trembled on the keyboard. What should he do? Call the police? But the man was already in a police uniform. Joe's gaze remained fixed on the monitor. Every movement of the mysterious intruder was sure and deliberate, as if this wasn't his first time. "Central, there's a man in tactical gear," Joe rasped into the radio, trying to stay calm. "Looks like a cop." "I'm checking further." "Are you sure?" The dispatcher's voice changed slightly, growing more cautious. "Damn it, I see him right now on the screen," Joe replied, irritated. The figure froze in one of the doorways, standing motionless in the shadows. To an outside observer, it could have looked like simple building security. But something unsettled Joe. There was something unnatural about this person. He stood there for too long, as if waiting for someone or something, and like a hunter, patiently waiting for prey. "Central, I don't like this at all. This guy is just standing there." Joe's voice suddenly trailed off as the man on the screen abruptly turned toward the camera. The figure stared directly into the lens. Even through the screen, where the image was slightly blurred, Joe felt a strange tension. The intruder seemed to see him, even though the camera was hidden in a corner near the ceiling. A second later, the man resumed moving, disappearing from view. Nelson pulled away from the monitor, his heart racing. He quickly picked up the phone and dialed the local police station. "This is Joe Nelson, the security guard. We've got a suspicious figure in tactical gear. Someone's sneaking around the church. I need a patrol, and fast." Struggling to hold onto the phone, he switched the cameras to motion tracking mode. But the intruder had already vanished, as if he'd melted into the labyrinth of dark corridors. It was around 6 a.m. when the first group of participants for the training session arrived at the Midlothian church. The air was cool, and the pre-dawn silence enveloped the streets. Alex Williams, one of the regulars at Terry, Missy, Bever's workouts, pulled up to the church in his pickup and turned off the engine. Normally, Missy would already be there, preparing for the session, but today something felt off. "Strange," Alex muttered as he stepped out of the truck, glancing at the church's dark windows. Normally, the gym lights would be on by now. Gradually, the rest of the group began to gather. They were a mix of ages and fitness levels, but they were all united by their love for energetic and positive Missy. However, this time, the atmosphere was tense. No one had seen the instructor. "Maybe she's just running late," suggested Ashley, adjusting her workout clothes. "She never is, but things happen." Alex walked over to the church doors and tried the handle. Locked. He frowned and knocked. No response, no movement inside. "Give me a minute, I'll check around back," he said. Without waiting for a reply, he started walking around the building, checking the side doors. When Alex finally found one of the doors unlocked, his heart skipped a beat. It was the black door at the back of the building, leading directly into the gym. He cautiously pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, with only faint rays of morning light filtering through the windows. A strange metallic smell lingered in the air. Instinctively, Alex slowed his pace as he moved toward the gym. Something was wrong. "Missy?" he called out, echoing off the walls. But there was no response. When Alex entered the gym, his eyes were immediately drawn to something on the floor, a dark stain spreading beneath a motionless figure. He froze, realizing it was blood. And beside it, Missy's body. She lay face down, unmoving. Her clothes were torn, and her skin was covered in deep wounds. The floor around her showed signs of a struggle, with scattered objects in disarray. Alex felt his legs weaken, but he forced himself to move closer. "Oh my God," he whispered, dropping to his knees beside her. "Missy?" Her body was cold, and the blood had already started to clot. In a panic, Alex recoiled, his breathing quickening. With trembling hands, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "Emergency! Emergency!" he gasped into the phone. "At the church? Midlothian Church. We found a body. It's Missy Bevers. She's dead. She's been killed." The rest of the workout group, still outside, soon noticed Alex rushing out of the building, his face pale. Ashley and the others began asking questions, but he could only shake his head, trying to explain what had happened. Within minutes, the first police car arrived. Officers quickly cordoned off the crime scene and searched the building. The gym had become a scene of brutal murder, every detail screaming that something terrible had occurred. When Officer Daniel Hope, the lead investigator, arrived on the scene, he immediately knew this was no ordinary killing. This was a meticulously planned crime. When Officer Daniel Hope arrived at the scene, the air was thick with tension. The church was cordoned off with yellow tape, and despite the early hour, reporters had already gathered outside. Several patrol cars lined the curb, flashing their blue lights, while officers kept the onlookers and media at a safe distance. Hope stepped out of his car, smoothing down his short chestnut hair, his sharp eyes surveying the scene. Midlothian was a quiet town, and brutal murders were rare, adding to the unsettling nature of what had occurred. Daniel was a seasoned investigator who had seen many serious cases, but even he sensed this one was going to be different. Officer Hope, one of the junior officers, quickly approached him. "We found the body in the gym. It's Terry Bevers, the fitness instructor. The murder likely happened a few hours ago." Hope nodded and headed toward the building. As he passed the entrance, he noticed several members of the fitness group sitting quietly on a nearby bench. They looked shaken, speaking in short, hushed sentences, but mostly remaining silent, stunned by what had happened. "In the gym itself?" Hope asked, stopping at the door. "Yes," the officer replied. "Severe injuries, likely a bladed weapon. No signs of theft or forced entry, except for one unlocked door at the back. But the strangest thing is the video footage." Hope paused and turned toward him. "Video footage?" "Yes. The security cameras captured someone walking around the building shortly before the murder. They were in full tactical gear, helmet, bulletproof vest, elbow pads. It looked like police equipment." "Police equipment?" Hope frowned. "Are you sure?" "Here, take a look," the officer said, handing Hope a tablet with the security footage. Hope sat down on the church steps and began reviewing the video. The screen showed a figure in tactical gear walking through the church corridors. This was not an ordinary burglar. The person's movements were calm and deliberate, without any signs of panic or haste. They inspected every door, checking rooms as if they knew exactly what they were looking for. The figure was intimidating, completely concealed in armor, with a helmet obscuring their face. Someone like that could easily be mistaken for a police officer, but something told Hope that a real cop wouldn't behave this way. They were inside the building before the murder, the officer explained as Hope looked up from the screen. "We checked all the footage. They entered through the back door about an hour before the fitness group was scheduled to arrive." Hope looked at the video again. This person had been waiting. They seemed to know Missy would be there alone, and that no one would interrupt them. "Where's the footage of the murder?" Hope asked. "There's nothing from the gym cameras. Either they disabled them in advance or knew exactly where they were located. We didn't capture the actual attack." Daniel considered the situation. The killer knew the layout of the cameras, the doors, and the daily routine. This wasn't a random crime. Everything pointed to a meticulously planned murder. "This person didn't break in to rob or steal something," Hope said. Standing up, "They came for her, and they knew exactly what they were doing." They walked into the building, and Hope immediately smelled the metallic scent of blood mixed with the cold air in the gym. Missy's body had already been covered with a sheet, but traces of a struggle and chaotic bloodstains were still visible on the floor. This hadn't been a quiet death. Missy had fought until the end. No signs of a weapon? Hope asked, surveying the crime scene. Not yet, the forensic examiner standing nearby replied. But based on the wounds, it was likely a knife or something similar. Possibly a long blade. Hope looked around the room, noting the broken workout equipment and the blood smears on the walls. The walls seemed to have captured the moments of the struggle, and somewhere in this chaos lay the key to understanding what had happened. This was personal, he said aloud. And this person knew exactly what they were doing. The officers around him nodded silently, sharing his thoughts. Hope understood they had a difficult investigation ahead. The killer was a professional, well prepared, and knew how to cover their tracks. Daniel Hope sat at a small table in the cramped interrogation room, which had been temporarily converted into a video analysis hub. Around him, monitors displayed security footage from the cameras installed inside the church. In front of him sat a technician, who was pulling up the footage on the main screen, showing everything that happened inside the church on the morning of the murder. "Take a look at this again," the technician said, rewinding the video to the moment when the figure in tactical gear first appeared on camera. The screen flickered into the gray tones of night vision. In the dimly lit church hall, barely illuminated by streetlights outside, a figure emerged from the shadows. The person moved slowly and deliberately as if they knew the building was empty. They walked straight ahead, not looking around, touching door handles and slightly bending forward to check if any rooms were open. Their face was completely hidden under a helmet, and their body was protected by a bulletproof vest. "Notice how they move," Hope muttered, closely watching every step. "There's not a hint of hesitation. They know exactly where they're going." The technician nodded, fast-forwarding the video. The unknown individual methodically inspected the church, starting from the main entrance, and moving through the hallways and side rooms. Their movements were purposeful. It seemed as though they knew the exact location of the cameras and how to avoid them. Occasionally, they paused briefly in front of a door, as if listening, before continuing on their route. "What is this?" Hope whispered. "They're moving like this is their job." The video continued. After walking through the hallway, the figure turned right and disappeared into a zone not covered by cameras. For several minutes, the person was out of sight. "And here's the interesting part," the technician said, stopping the footage at a certain frame. "They know exactly that the cameras in the gym aren't working. We have no footage of what happened inside. So they either disabled the cameras beforehand, or they knew they weren't functioning," Hope said thoughtfully. "They came prepared." The technician played another segment, where the figure reappeared on camera, emerging from the hallway. Now they were moving slower, as if waiting for something. "Look at how they stand." Hope pointed at the screen. "It's like they're waiting, or expecting someone." The figure stopped in a doorway, and then suddenly looked directly at the camera. This moment caused Hope to tense slightly. It was as if the killer knew they were being watched but showed no fear or concern about it. "We've reviewed the whole footage. This is the only time they interact with the camera," the technician said. "That's no coincidence," Hope remarked. "This person is either connected to someone inside the church, or they've worked here before. They're moving with too much confidence for it to be a coincidence." He leaned back in his chair, trying to process what he had just seen. The person in the video knew where to go and how to avoid being caught by most cameras. They moved as if they had rehearsed the route dozens of times, and every step was part of a carefully thought-out plan. "They didn't come here by chance," Hope said, flipping through the papers with the preliminary analysis results. "They knew Missy would be here. And they waited for her." The technician nodded. "Do you think they're a cop?" he asked, voicing the question that had lingered since the beginning of the investigation. "I'm not sure," Hope replied, rubbing his chin. "But one thing is clear. They wanted us to think they're a cop. Either they're using the gear to throw us off, or it's a real uniform. Either way, this isn't just some random person off the street." Daniel took a deep breath, staring at the screen where the figure continued their silent trek through the church. "We need to dig deeper. Find out who had access to police gear in this area and see if any local officers could be involved. This person didn't leave behind obvious clues. But their confidence and preparation, that's their weakness. They made a mistake, thinking we wouldn't find them." Hope turned away from the screen, knowing there was still much work ahead. The killer was well prepared, But the more they analyzed the footage, the clearer it became. They weren't infallible. The office was filled with the bright light of a spring day, but the atmosphere inside felt heavy. Daniel Hope sat at the desk across from Ashley Miller, Missy's best friend and colleague. Ashley's dry eyes, despite the deep sorrow she felt, showed that she had already exhausted her tears, and her voice was barely audible. "I still can't believe this happened," Ashley said quietly, nervously wringing her hands. Missy was so bright. She always radiated positivity. Hope remained silent, waiting for Ashley to be ready to talk. In moments like this, it was often necessary to give the person time, allowing their emotions to come to the surface. She loved people. She was energetic, always ready to support others, Ashley continued, staring at the floor. No one could be her enemy. She never hurt anyone. Daniel made a brief note in his notebook. Over the past few hours, he had heard almost the same thing from several people. Missy Bevers was well liked in her circle, an energetic and vibrant fitness instructor who brought people together for her classes and kept them motivated. One person after another described her in the same way: she was loved. She led an active social life, had no apparent enemies, and was always willing to help. Throughout her career, Missy had earned the respect and trust of her students and friends. However, details soon began to emerge that made Daniel think. "She was active on social media, right?" Hope asked Ashley once she had calmed down a bit. "Yes, she posted a lot. Mostly workouts, fitness tips, photos from her classes." Ashley hesitated, but lately, something had changed. She became more tense. Hope looked up. "What do you mean?" "Well, she never said anything directly, but sometimes I noticed she seemed nervous after looking at her phone. I didn't ask what happened, but one time, I saw her reaction. It was like she had seen something unpleasant." Daniel frowned. "Unpleasant? Could you explain?" Ashley took a deep breath. "A few months ago, Missy mentioned she had received strange messages on social media. At first, they were just anonymous comments under her posts. But then, as I understood it, it escalated. She said she had started receiving threats but didn't take it too seriously. She said it was just internet trolls." Hope sat up straight in his chair as if gathering his thoughts. This was an important detail they had not seriously considered before. "Did she show you these messages?" "No, but I remember asking her once what kind of threats they were. She said it was from someone anonymous, with no photo or name, and she didn't want to get involved. She just ignored it." Hope made a note in his notebook, then looked up at Ashley. "Do you think it could be related to what happened?" Ashley lowered her eyes and nodded. "I don't know, but something about her behavior changed. She became more cautious. She even mentioned taking a break from social media, even though it used to be her favorite thing, connecting with her students and sharing motivation." Hope's team had already started analyzing Missy's social media accounts, but so far, they hadn't found anything suspicious. Her page was filled with typical photos from workouts, smiling participants, promotions for upcoming classes, and personal photos with her family. But now, with the mention of threats, Daniel knew they needed to dig deeper. "We'll check her messages," Hope said, standing up from the desk. "And if you remember anything else, even the smallest detail, call me." Ashley nodded as she stood up. After she left, Daniel lingered in the silence for a moment. His intuition told him that these threats, like the mysterious figure in tactical gear, were no coincidence. Missy was a public figure, and her active life had seemingly attracted unwanted attention. Later that day, the police began a thorough investigation of her social media messages. Soon, they found something that wasn't immediately obvious. Beneath the innocent posts about fitness and healthy living were hidden threatening messages. They came from several anonymous accounts, menacing, cruel, and disturbingly detailed. "I know I'm watching you. This isn't a game. Your time is almost up. I'm close. You won't get away." Each of these messages hinted that someone had likely been planning this horrific day for a long time. The investigation office was filled with silence, apart from the low hum of computers and the rustling of papers. Daniel Hope sat at his desk, surrounded by copies of case materials, crime scene photos, printouts of the threats Missy had received, and surveillance footage showing the mysterious perpetrator in tactical gear. On the wall in front of him was a board displaying key evidence, with strings connecting potential leads and theories. "Something doesn't add up," he muttered to himself. Detective Thomas Grace, his longtime partner and a seasoned analyst, approached. Grace was one of those people who could always see the bigger picture hidden behind the details, something that often escaped others. "You think we missed something?" he asked, examining the board. "I'm not sure," Hope replied, staring at the image of the unknown killer on the surveillance footage. "I keep coming back to the same question: was the killer specifically targeting Missy? Or was she a random victim?" Grace thought for a moment and nodded. "It's possible, but if we consider how he moved through the building, the killer knew where to go. He knew the cameras in the gym weren't working. He didn't just come here hoping to randomly run into someone." They re-watched the footage. On the screen, the figure in tactical gear moved slowly but confidently through the church corridors, checking rooms, doors, and windows. Hope felt that the answer to his question was hidden in those movements. If this were a random victim, Hope began, the perpetrator wouldn't have methodically inspected the building like this. He came at the right time, to the right place. But why Missy? Grace sat down beside him and shook his head. "We've looked at every possibility. Missy didn't have enemies and wasn't involved in any criminal activity. Those threats she received through social media are, of course, concerning, but they could have just been empty words. The internet is full of that kind of thing. And this person wasn't acting impulsively. He knew what he was doing." Hope rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the case. So, he knew Missy would be in the church that morning. It wasn't a coincidence. They rewatched the footage again, rewinding it to the moment the killer entered the building through the back door. He headed straight toward the interior, bypassing the lobby and other rooms, which indicated precise knowledge of the layout. He moved purposefully as if waiting for Missy to appear. "The question is," Hope continued, "was he here for her, or was someone else supposed to show up? Maybe he confused his targets?" "No," Grace interrupted, shaking his head firmly. "He was here for her. Everything points to that. He studied her schedule and knew she would come early, alone. This wasn't an accident. He wouldn't have planned his entry so carefully if he wasn't sure about his target. So someone wanted Missy dead very badly," Hope said slowly, processing what he'd heard. They reviewed the surveillance footage once more. Everything aligned: the killer's arrival time, his behavior, and even his precise knowledge of the building's security blind spots. But one aspect still troubled Hope. "Something isn't sitting right with me," he said, squinting at the screen. "It's almost too carefully planned. It's as if he wanted us to think he's a professional cop or someone with access to that kind of gear." Grace nodded, agreeing with his concerns. "That could be part of the plan. Disguising himself as a cop to throw us off. But why Missy? She had no dealings with the police." "We checked." Hope stood up and approached the board, where crime scene photos and copies of her messages were pinned. Everything pointed to someone who knew Missy well, perhaps too well. But the anonymous threats and the killer's disguise as a police officer could be just parts of a larger plan. "Did we look into her circle?" he suddenly asked. Grace gave him a thoughtful look. "In what sense?" "Her family, friends, clients, everyone who had been around her in recent months. Someone must have known about her morning workouts. And something tells me that this person is more connected to her personal life than we initially thought." Grace, understanding where Hope was heading, quickly stood up. "You think someone from her circle could be involved?" "It's possible," Hope nodded. "We already know this murder was planned. And the killer knew her schedule. That means it might be someone she trusted or someone close to her." They decided to return to analyzing Missy's circle and re-examine everyone she had interacted with in the past few months. Hope was convinced that the answer lay not only in the anonymous threats but also in someone from her life who knew her plans and had the means to track her. The investigation was now becoming personal. The morning sun bathed the city of Midlothian in light, but in the investigation team's office, the atmosphere remained grim. Daniel Hope was replaying the killer's footage over and over, trying to catch even the smallest detail they might have missed. Yet, the key to solving the case seemed elusive. Everything pointed to the fact that this person was prepared, knew exactly what he was doing, and had meticulously planned his appearance. The phone on his desk rang, breaking the tense silence. "Hope speaking," he answered, bringing the receiver to his ear. "Dan, it's Grace. We've got witnesses who saw a person in tactical gear near the church that night." His partner's voice sounded excited. "Who are they? What did they see?" Hope immediately tensed. "A couple of local teenagers. They were in a parking lot near the mall, a few blocks from the church, late at night. They saw someone walking along the street in what looked like a police uniform. At first, the kids thought it was some patrol officer, but then they realized something was off, Grace explained. Did they see his face? No, Grace hesitated, but their description of the gear matches what we saw on the video. The time matches too. It was around 3 in the morning. 2 hours before the church alarm went off. Bring them to me, Hope said curtly, already rising from his chair. Half an hour later, Daniel sat in the interrogation room across from 2 teenagers, a boy and a girl, who looked nervous but were trying to remain calm. Hope had worked with many witnesses before, and he knew that teenagers often approached such events with a mixture of excitement, sometimes underestimating their observations. Joshua, Jessica, he began, nodding toward them both. Thank you for coming. I need you to tell me everything you saw that night as accurately as possible. Joshua, a tall, lanky boy, was the first to speak. Well, Jessica and I were driving around. It was late, around 3. We were heading home when I saw this guy. He paused, searching for the right words, and glanced at Jessica. He was walking down the street, Jessica added, rubbing her hands. We thought he was a cop because he was in a uniform, a vest, a helmet, everything looked like police gear. But then we noticed something strange. What exactly seemed strange? Hope asked. Well, Joshua scratched his head, trying to remember. He was walking slowly and kept looking around like he was checking if anyone was following him. It was weird, you know? Cops don't usually act like that. Daniel nodded, understanding what he meant. A regular patrol officer wouldn't be trying to hide. This person, on the contrary, clearly didn't want to be seen. This only reinforced Hope's suspicion that the killer had deliberately chosen such a disguise. Did you see his face? Hope asked again. Jessica shook her head. No. He was wearing a helmet and a visor. You know, like motorcyclists have, only it completely covered his face. Which direction was he heading? Hope continued, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it from them. Toward the church, Joshua answered confidently. We drove past him, and I remember he turned down the road leading there. We didn't think much of it because we figured he was just patrolling. But now, after hearing what happened, Hope needed to make sure they hadn't missed anything. He scrutinized the witnesses' faces, trying to gauge if they had told him everything. Are you certain it was a man? He suddenly asked. Both teenagers hesitated. Joshua shrugged. Honestly, we can't say for sure. He was fully geared up. Looked big, but we didn't hear or see any other clues, like a voice or anything. But yeah, it seemed like a man. Daniel nodded, noting this detail. They had assumed the perpetrator was male, but the witnesses couldn't confirm it. Perhaps this was another trick to throw them off. Thank you for your help, Hope said, concluding the interview. If you remember anything else, no matter how small, please get in touch with us. After the teenagers left, Grace entered the room. What do you think? We're on the right track, Hope replied, looking at the evidence board. This person was near the church hours before the murder. He was preparing and planning everything carefully. So, what's next? Grace asked. Hope pondered. Now that they had witnesses confirming the presence of the killer near the crime scene hours before the event, they needed to understand what had driven this person to such desperate actions. We're narrowing it down, Daniel sighed. Now we need to figure out who this person is and how they're connected to Missy. The witnesses confirmed that it was the same person from the video, but why did he choose her? We need to dig deeper. I'm sure his connection to Missy runs deeper than just random online threats. Daniel Hope was sitting at his desk, sorting through case files, when Grace approached, holding a thin folder with new information. His focused expression meant only one thing: they had an important lead. Dan, you need to see this, Grace began, placing the folder on the desk. Hope set aside his papers and took the folder. He slowly flipped through the pages, carefully studying the details. Jason Thompson? He asked, pausing on the name. Yeah, a former police officer. We checked her contacts and found that a few days before the murder, Missy was in contact with him. They talked on the phone for about 30 minutes. Former officer? Hope squinted, reading the file closely. He left the force recently. Why? Grace sat down across from him and explained. That's the interesting part. Thompson left under rather suspicious circumstances. Officially, it was voluntary, but the file shows there was an internal investigation. Inconsistencies in reports, and unauthorized actions during an operation. Nothing concrete, but something's off. Hope turned a few more pages, scanning Thompson's biography. An experienced officer with a solid reputation, but in the last few months of his service, his conduct had raised questions. Then, he abruptly left, and the matter was hushed up. Why was she talking to him? Hope asked, frowning. That's the big question. We don't know yet. He wasn't listed among her friends, and her family doesn't know anything about him, Grace replied. But judging by how long the conversation lasted, they were discussing something important. Hope stood up and began pacing the room, processing the new facts. Thompson is a former cop. Missy was killed by someone in police gear. It could be a connection, or it could be a coincidence. But the suspicious circumstances around his departure from the force. That can't be random. Grace nodded. We've already checked his alibi for the night of the murder. Officially, he was at home, but we have no confirmation of that. He lives alone, and no one can definitively say where he was. Hope narrowed his eyes. So, he could have been near the church. His background in law enforcement explains access to the gear. And the fact that he concealed his face suggests he either knew Missy or was afraid she'd recognize him. But what ties them together? Grace pondered. If they weren't friends or colleagues, what could have made her contact him before her death? We need to find out what they talked about, Hope said firmly. We might not only have a motive but also a key to identifying the killer. He walked over to the evidence board and pinned Thompson's photo next to the images of the unknown killer. The picture was starting to take shape, but one thing remained unclear. Why had Missy talked to him? And did Thompson know about the threats she'd been receiving? We have to interrogate him, Hope said, turning to Grace. But carefully. If he's the one in tactical gear, he won't reveal much easily. We're already working on it, Grace replied. But be careful, Dan. If Thompson is the guy in that tactical gear, he'll stop at nothing to cover his tracks. I know, Hope said quietly. But we'll find the truth anyway. Now, they had a new goal, to uncover the connection between Missy and Jason Thompson and how their conversations might have led to her death. The investigative office was bathed in daylight as Daniel Hope and Thomas Grace entered the interrogation room. Sitting at the table, under the harsh light of the lamp, was Jason Thompson, a former police officer, now dressed in a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. A stark contrast to his former professional appearance. Thompson appeared calm, his gaze focused, but there were traces of fatigue and tension in his face. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Mr. Thompson, Hope began, sitting down across from him. No problem, Jason responded in an even voice, crossing his arms over his chest. I heard what happened to Missy. It's awful. Hope gave him a piercing look, trying to detect even the slightest hint of a lie or anxiety. We need to discuss your connection with Missy Bevers. A few days before her death, you had a phone conversation with her. What was it about? Hope asked, careful not to miss any important details in his responses. Jason paused for a moment before answering. We were just talking. We were friends, or more like acquaintances. I helped her a couple of times with organizing events for her fitness group. We were discussing one of those events, something like a charity fitness event she wanted to host. Hope squinted skeptically, sensing that the answer was too superficial. He decided to dig deeper. Friends, you say? And you never noticed that someone was threatening her? Maybe someone had an unhealthy interest in her? Jason shook his head. No, she never mentioned anything like that. Although, he hesitated, she did seem a bit unsettled in the last few weeks, but I didn't think it was anything serious. She was a strong woman, hard to argue with. I figured she could handle any problem. Hope glanced at Grace. Both detectives sensed that Jason was holding something back. But why? What could compel him to hide critical details? Let's talk about your resignation. Hope suddenly changed the subject, locking eyes with Thompson. We know you didn't leave the force voluntarily. Thompson sighed heavily, tension creasing his face. That's old news, he said, turning away momentarily. I was suspected in a corruption case. There was a lot of dirt thrown around, but it was all lies. I was set up. In the end, I decided to leave rather than drag it out. But I'm innocent. They say you were involved in some questionable operations and covered up certain actions by your colleagues, Grace noted, opening the file in front of him. Are you saying none of that is true? Thompson shrugged, his gaze hardening. There's always politics and dirty games in the police force. I won't deny that I knew about certain things, but I never participated in them. It was all part of their attempt to get rid of me. They made me a scapegoat. Hope watched his reaction closely. Jason knew how to handle pressure, which was unsurprising for a former officer. But the question remained, how far was he willing to go to protect himself? So, you claim you're not involved in any corruption or Missy's murder? Hope asked, emphasizing the last part of the question. Absolutely, Thompson responded firmly. Missy and I were just friends, and I had no motive or reason to harm her. I'm sorry for what happened to her, but I had nothing to do with it. You weren't near the church that night? Grace pressed. No, Thompson answered calmly. I was at home. No one saw me because I live alone, but that doesn't mean I was there. You have no proof that I was anywhere near the crime scene. Hope thought for a moment. Thompson was experienced, and if he was involved, he had likely acted with extreme caution. But there were still the facts, his connection to Missy, his suspicious departure from the police force, and the fact that the killer had used tactical gear resembling police equipment. None of this could be mere coincidence. We're still verifying your alibi, Mr. Thompson, Hope said coldly, standing up. If anything new comes up, we'll be in touch. Of course, Jason replied, standing as well. But, as I said, I have nothing to hide. After Thompson left, Grace turned to Hope. What do you think? He's hiding something, Hope said, staring at the closed door. Maybe he's not directly involved in the murder, but he's tied to something bigger. We need to keep digging. Hope knew Thompson wasn't being completely honest. But the question remained, what exactly was he hiding? And how could his past be connected to Missy Bever's death? The crime scene at the Midlothian church was silent, broken only by the sound of footsteps and the rustling of papers. Forensic experts continued their work, processing the area where Missy Bevers had been murdered. Investigators focused on details that could lead to a breakthrough. One of the experts, James Ellison, noticed something unusual on the floor of the gym where Missy's body had been found. He carefully examined the spot and discovered faint shoe prints visible on the carpet. The prints were subtle but stood out against the worn surface. James carefully photographed them before beginning a detailed analysis. Sometime later, in the forensic lab, Daniel Hope and Thomas Grace received the report from the specialists. Ellison presented the findings that reinforced their suspicions. We've analyzed the footprints, Ellison began, showing Hope and Grace the results. These are the shoe prints you can see in the photos. We were able to determine that it's a rare model of boots. Hope raised his eyebrows. A rare model? What's special about it? Yes, Ellison nodded. These boots are part of specialized gear used by certain police and military units. Not only are they rare, but they also have specific features, such as a unique tread pattern and reinforced soles, making them ideal for working in tough conditions. Grace frowned. So, the killer could be connected to law enforcement? It appears that way, Ellison confirmed. We found several distinct prints at the crime scene, and they match this boot model. Hope flipped through the photographs, carefully studying the details. The pictures showed deep impressions with a unique tread pattern that stood out from regular footwear. This confirms that the killer had access to specialized equipment, Hope noted, continuing to review the findings. And that it could be someone who uses these boots in their line of work. Exactly, Ellison agreed. We also checked records on supplies and owners of this boot model, but we haven't found any specific matches yet. However, the presence of these prints at the crime scene strongly suggests that the perpetrator might either be in law enforcement or have access to it. Grace sighed, clearly realizing that their investigation had just become more complicated. We need to conduct another review of police and military personnel to find anyone who might be using these boots, he suggested. Hope nodded. Yes, that will give us more information about potential suspects. But we also need to piece together the other evidence that might help us identify this person. The investigators now had more grounds to pursue their suspicions about the killer's connection to law enforcement. While this raised even more questions, it also provided new directions for the investigation. The presence of rare footwear at the crime scene was not just a coincidence, it was a significant clue pointing to a deeper connection between the killer and the victim. Hope and Grace left the lab, preparing for the next stage of the investigation. Their new goal was to determine who in law enforcement or the military could be linked to this crime and how exactly that person was connected to Missy Bevers. The police archive buzzed with activity as investigators, forensic specialists, and analysts vigorously discussed new evidence and potential connections. Daniel Hope and Thomas Grace gathered in the conference room, surrounded by folders, documents, and printouts related to the Missy Bevers case. They knew they needed to delve into the motives that might have led to her murder. "We found some interesting facts," Grace began, tossing several files onto the table. "Yesterday, we gained access to emails and messages related to Missy. Clearly, in the last few months, she had been more cautious than usual." Hope leaned over the documents, carefully examining their contents. "What exactly did we find?" he asked. Grace continued. "Missy frequently communicated with several local journalists and activists. One of her friends, Catherine Lee, mentioned that Missy had become worried about something illegal she had learned about the Midlothian police. She hinted that she was planning to expose it." Hope furrowed his brow, recalling what they already knew about Missy. "Illegal activity? What specifically was her information about?" "It's unclear for now," Grace admitted. "But Catherine said Missy was going to publish some article or statement. She even hinted that she had evidence. In her messages, she also mentioned fearing for her safety." Hope sighed, realizing the importance of this new information. So, Missy may have stumbled upon something related to corruption or other illegal activities within the police. This could have been the primary motive for her murder. Someone knew she was planning to go public with this information. "Exactly," Grace confirmed. "We need to find out what exactly she discovered and who might have been interested in silencing her." Hope nodded and moved on to the next phase of the investigation. "We need to speak with her colleagues and contacts. They might provide us with additional insights into what Missy was planning to reveal. We should also check her email and message records for more specifics." The investigators began searching for additional details, and soon they had new information. Catherine Lee, Missy's friend, agreed to meet and provide more details about the last days of her friend's life. Meeting with Catherine at a nearby cafe, Hope and Grace learned more about Missy's plans. Catherine was excited, her voice trembling with emotion. "Missy discovered something," Catherine started. "She mentioned some manipulations and corruption within the police. I don't know all the details, but she was determined. She said she had evidence that could shock the public." "Do you know what evidence she was referring to?" Hope asked. Catherine shook her head. "No, I didn't see it. She only said she had documentation and testimonies that could support her claims. She planned to meet with journalists to disclose everything." Grace interjected. "Can you tell us who she was in contact with?" Catherine thought for a moment and then named a few people, including well-known local journalists and activists. Hope and Grace began checking these contacts and found that Missy was indeed taking steps to reveal information. One journalist, Michael Harper, stated that Missy was supposed to provide him with evidence but disappeared before the scheduled meeting. This strengthened their suspicion that the murder was connected to Missy's attempts to expose illegal activities. Hope returned to the office, carefully analyzing all the new data. "We're on the right track," he told Grace. "Missy stumbled upon something important and dangerous regarding corruption. Someone in the police might have acted to prevent her disclosure. We need to find out who was interested in keeping her quiet," Grace added. "And who among her contacts might be connected to this illegal activity." The investigators now had a clear picture of the potential motives behind Missy's murder and the reasons for her death. They understood that the crime could be linked to an attempt to conceal vital information, opening new avenues for solving the case. The noisy evening at the Bevers home was interrupted by the alarming sound of the phone. Emily Bevers, mother of Terry, Missy, paused her household chores when an unknown number appeared on her mobile screen. She hesitated, expecting nothing good, and answered the call. A muffled voice came through the line, causing her heart to race fearfully. "We know what you're doing. If you don't stop trying to find the truth, the consequences will be terrible." Emily hung up, her hands trembling. In shock, she turned to her husband, John, who had just returned from work. "John, it was again," she started, trying to calm herself. John looked at her with concern and took the phone, seeing the call log. When he called the number listed in the message, he heard the same threatening speech. "We need to notify the police," John said, hanging up. "Soon," Detectives Hope and Grace arrived at the Bevers home to take statements and investigate the new threats. With his experienced eye, Hope noticed that all phone records and messages were meticulously preserved, and his expression grew more serious. "I understand this must be terrifying," Hope said, "but we need to figure out what's happening. We already know Missy received threats, but now your family is being threatened. We'll do our best to find out who is behind this." Grace began examining the phone records and messages, taking notes. He noted that the messages were sent from several different numbers, indicating the use of technology to obscure the source of the communication. "These aren't just random threats," Grace remarked. "Sending messages from spoofed numbers requires specialized equipment. This suggests that someone has access to high-tech surveillance and communication tools." Hope nodded, realizing this confirmed their fears. "We need to find out who could have access to such equipment. It's likely someone who has dealt with law enforcement or the military." The investigators decided to start by checking everyone who had access to specialized surveillance technology. They began searching for information on former police and military personnel who might be involved in this case. Hope and Grace also analyzed the call logs and messages to identify any recurring patterns or technical features that could provide additional leads. Soon they discovered that among the former police officers was someone who had recently left the force under suspicious circumstances and had access to specialized equipment. This was Jason Thompson, the former officer they had already interrogated. His connections to Missy and his difficulties within the police made him a suspicious candidate. Hope and Grace decided to conduct further investigation into Thompson, especially given his previous connections to law enforcement and access to surveillance equipment. Meanwhile, Missy's family continued to receive threats. Each new message only heightened their fear and anxiety. The police were working diligently to protect them, establishing round-the-clock security and checking for any signs of surveillance. "We will do everything we can to protect you," Hope assured Emily and John Bevers. "But we also need to focus on finding out who is behind these threats." With new evidence and updated suspicions, Hope and Grace began a comprehensive investigation to determine who might be using specialized surveillance equipment for threats. This led them back to Jason Thompson, and they started preparing for the next phase of the investigation, hoping it would help uncover the truth and stop the threats against the Bevers family. Detectives Hope and Grace were in the office when important news arrived. One of the police informants reported that a person had been arrested for selling rare police boots on the black market. This information could represent a significant breakthrough in the investigation into Missy Bevers' murder. The informant was Martin Powell, who had been arrested for illegal trade in rare footwear used by special units. In his room, along with the boots, various records and documents related to purchases and sales were found. "We found records of a sale of a pair of boots within the last month," Hope said, studying the documents provided. "This model is the same one whose prints we found at the crime scene." Grace, who took on the interrogation of Powell, began to sift through the details. "Powell," he said, addressing the detained man, "we know you were selling rare boots. We need to understand who purchased them. If you want to help yourself, tell us who bought this model." Powell, noticeably nervous, slowly replied, "I sold those boots to Josh Randall. He's a private security guard working for a security company. It was a few weeks ago." Grace and Hope exchanged glances. Josh Randall's name was familiar. He was associated with a private security firm composed of former officers. These individuals had access to specialized equipment and could potentially be involved in illegal activities. "Where can we find Josh Randall?" Grace asked. "He works at Valkyrie Security," Powell answered. "They're based downtown. He's often there if you need to catch him." Hope and Grace immediately headed to the office of the private security company Valkyrie. It was a building in the city center with high security. Upon arrival, the detectives requested permission to enter, presenting their badges. "We're here to speak with Josh Randall," Hope informed the receptionist. "We have reason to believe he may be connected to a murder investigation." The receptionist contacted the internal security team, and soon the detectives were granted access to the office. Josh Randall was summoned to the conference room, where he was met by Hope and Grace. He appeared confident but noticeably tense. "We've learned that you purchased a pair of rare police boots that Martin Powell was selling," Hope began. "We need to understand why you wanted those boots and where you used them." Randall responded slowly, "Yes, I bought those boots. But it was just for personal use, not for work. I haven't used them for any official purposes. Grace looked at him skeptically. Why do you have the boots then, if you're not using them for work? And if you were innocent, why did you hide the purchase? Randall sighed and, clearly hesitating, replied, in recent months, we've often worked with people looking for means to ensure their safety. I bought the boots because they were good for protection and comfort. But honestly, I didn't expect them to end up in this situation. Hope stepped forward. Do you realize that there are former officers in your company who might be involved in illegal activities? And that we're currently checking all connections and contacts related to your work? Randall's expression shifted sharply. I didn't know the boots were linked to any crime. We're a private security company, we operate within the law. If there's a connection, I know nothing about it. Hope and Grace noted that Randall genuinely seemed scared. This could mean he wasn't directly involved, but someone among his colleagues might be. We'll verify your story, Hope said. But remember, everything you say could be crucial to our investigation. If you have any information about who else might be involved, please let us know. Randall nodded, and the detectives left the office. The next step was clear. They needed to investigate Randall's connections with other employees at his company and find out who among them might be involved in illegal activities. A breakthrough in the case had been achieved, and now the investigators hoped that the new evidence would lead them closer to solving Missy Bever's murder. Detectives Hope and Grace decided to set up covert surveillance on Josh. The police installed listening devices in his home and monitored all his movements. In the first few days of surveillance, Josh behaved normally. He went to work, met with colleagues, and did nothing suspicious. However, after a few days, his behavior changed. He suspects something, Grace said, watching Josh's movements on a monitor set up at headquarters. Look, he's changing his routes, constantly looking around, and this morning he even tracked a police patrol. He's clearly on edge. Hope nodded. It was evident that Josh was hiding something, but the question remained. What exactly? The next day, the surveillance showed its first real breakthrough. Josh unexpectedly drove to an abandoned warehouse in the industrial area on the outskirts of town. This area was known for its reputation as a site for illegal dealings. Hope and Grace dispatched operatives to follow him from a safe distance to avoid arousing suspicion. Through the dimly lit corridors of surveillance cameras, they saw Josh enter the large, dilapidated warehouse. He looked wary, glancing around several times before disappearing behind metal doors. From that moment, the detectives closely monitored his actions. We need to check what's inside, Hope said to the team of operatives. This could be where he's storing all his tactical gear, and if we're right, this is where we'll find what we need. Grace took responsibility for organizing the team. The operatives were ready to enter the warehouse at a moment's notice if the opportunity arose. They continued to observe Josh's every move using thermal cameras and drones. He's been in the warehouse for an hour, Grace noted as Josh reappeared on the screens. He's preparing something. We can't wait any longer. At that moment, Hope received information that confirmed his suspicions. According to data from informants, Josh was storing tactical gear and weapons in the warehouse, similar to what had been used in Missy's murder. We can't waste time, Hope said. It's time to act. The decision was made. They would begin the operation immediately. Hope and Grace joined the team of operatives ready to storm the warehouse and catch Josh in the act. They knew this was the moment of truth. Here, in the warehouse, they would find evidence linking Josh to the murder. But no one knew what awaited them inside. The warehouse was surrounded. Operatives took positions around the perimeter while Hope and Grace monitored the situation from a command center in an inconspicuous van near the entrance. Everything was ready for the operation. Josh Randall, the suspect in Missy Beaver's murder and a key figure in the illegal network, was inside. He had no idea the police were about to storm in. Hope grabbed the radio and issued the command. Operation is a go. No one gets out. The operatives quietly and professionally advanced toward the entrance. They neutralized the guard at the gate and entered the building. But inside, they encountered something unexpected. The space was a maze of narrow corridors, cabinets, and shelves piled high with boxes of tactical gear and weapons. The warehouse was vast and abandoned, creating numerous hiding spots for someone familiar with the layout. Suddenly, Grace heard a whisper in his earpiece. Movement. To the right. Panic gripped the team. Josh seemed to know he was being pursued. He attempted to escape through one of the back exits. But the operatives were ready for that scenario and blocked all routes. Randall panicked. "Police! Drop your weapon and come out with your hands up," one of the officers shouted, his voice echoing through the warehouse. There was no response. In that instant, the first shots rang out. Josh opened fire, using the crates as cover. A shootout began, and the police had to seek protection while trying to approach Randall. "Damn, he's well prepared," Hope muttered, moving toward Grace. "He knows this warehouse like the back of his hand." Randall desperately darted through the corridors of the warehouse, but each time, the police tightened the noose. He acted skillfully, but the pressure was overwhelming. He had nowhere to run. Eventually, cornered, he made one last attempt to break free. He lunged toward the back exit, where he thought the path was clear. But they were waiting for him. A team of operatives blocked the exit, and before he could react, Josh found himself caught in the crossfire. He tried to return fire but was seriously wounded. As he fell to the concrete floor, Josh clutched his side, blood seeping through his fingers. The operatives immediately approached him, disarming and surrounding him. "Randall, who was the client?" Hope asked, stepping closer. He knew this was their last chance to get the truth. Gasping, Josh tried to say something, but his words came out in gasps. "I wasn't alone," he croaked, his face twisted in pain. "I was hired. It was a contract. I was just the executor." Hope leaned in closer. "Who ordered it? Who wanted her dead?" But Randall merely gasped, his strength fading. Before he died, he uttered his last words. "Look, upstairs. There's everything, information, everything." His body went limp, and his eyes closed. Josh Randall died on the spot. Grace approached Hope, his face tense. "He said he acted on orders. We're close, but who is this client?" Hope sighed, surveying the scene of the shootout. "This isn't over. We need to find out who is behind this. Josh was just the executor. The one who ordered the murder is still at large." The operation at the warehouse was over, but the real conspirators remained in the shadows. Now the team faced the task of uncovering who was behind the contract for Missy Beaver's murder and what secrets lay hidden in the upstairs that Josh had mentioned before his death. After the tense confrontation at the warehouse and the death of Josh Randall, investigators Hope and Grace returned to police headquarters, determined to decipher his last words. Soon, the crime scene team began searching the warehouse, examining every corner and box for clues that might shed light on the true mastermind behind Missy Beaver's murder. After a few hours, one of the operatives approached Hope with a small laptop and a box of documents. "We found this among Randall's belongings," he said, handing them over. "It looks like something is interesting here." Hope and Grace wasted no time. They started reviewing the files on the laptop and the documents, realizing this was their chance to uncover who was behind the crime. The first few files were technical reports, but soon they stumbled upon a document with a signature and seal that immediately caught their attention. "Wait," Hope said, delving into the document. "This can't be true." In Hope's hands was a contract for special services, signed by none other than Jason Thompson. As they delved deeper into the documents, the truth became undeniable. Jason Thompson, the former police officer mentioned earlier in the investigation, was the one who had ordered the murder. But the most shocking part was not that he hired Randall, but why he did it. Missy had accidentally uncovered his involvement in corrupt activities within the police. She was getting too close to the truth, and Thompson, already entangled in dirty dealings, could not afford to take the risk. He knew that if information about his illegal actions surfaced, it would ruin his career and personal life. "He hired Randall to take her out," Grace said, scanning one of the reports. "All those deals, illegal operations. Missy could have been the witness that would bring him down." Thompson wanted to cover his tracks, Hope added, looking at the printed list of operations Thompson managed. He thought it was his only way out. Every new document they found revealed the extent of Thompson's criminal activities. His name appeared in reports of illegal arms deals, corruption, and ties to criminal organizations. He built his influence within law enforcement, using his position to gain power and money. Missy learned about it by chance when one of her friends mentioned something suspicious about Thompson's behavior. "He must have suspected she would share this information," Hope said. And he couldn't allow her words to lead to his exposure. Now that the investigators knew the truth, they needed to apprehend Jason Thompson. With this evidence, they had every reason for an arrest. It was one of the darkest moments of their careers, to discover that a former officer they once trusted could sink so low as to murder to protect his secrets. "We'll arrest him today," Hope said firmly, closing the laptop and standing up. "He must answer for everything." Grace nodded silently. Ahead of them lay a difficult confrontation with a man who always seemed one step ahead. But now they had the evidence, and the truth had finally surfaced. Thompson, the former police officer and influential figure, turned out to be the one behind Missy Beaver's murder. The streets of Midlothian were surprisingly quiet on the day Jason Thompson was arrested. The events of the past few weeks had crashed down on the police and the town's residents like a wave. The identity of the murderer had been revealed, but despite this, a sense of closure felt elusive. Thompson was taken into custody without much resistance. When detectives Hope and Grace entered his home with an arrest warrant, he met them at the door with a weary expression, as if he knew this day would come eventually. "I knew you'd come," he said calmly as they cuffed him. He didn't deny his guilt. All the documents and evidence found at Randall's warehouse left him no chance. However, Thompson did not disclose any more names. He kept silent about everyone involved in his corrupt scheme. He understood that even his confession wouldn't stop the spread of the criminal network he was a part of. The case of Missy Beavers had come to an end, but instead of satisfaction, doubts lingered in the hearts of the investigators. Yes, the killer had been exposed, and Jason Thompson would pay for his crimes. Yet, how many more people were involved in his dark dealings? How many officers, like Randall, remained in the shadows? That evening, Hope and Grace sat in the precinct, reviewing the final reports on the case. The feeling of closure eluded them. Hope, pensively looking at the case file, sighed. "We solved the murder, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are still many people Thompson protected, and if we don't find them, this case will never be truly closed." Grace nodded in agreement. He, too, felt that there was something bigger behind this whole scheme. "Those people know how to hide," Grace said. "They're too experienced to make the same mistake Thompson did." Yet, despite this, Missy's case was officially closed. The police reported the investigation results, the mastermind was found, and the criminal was dead. Missy's family received some sense of justice, knowing her killer was punished. However, they, like the investigators, understood that the truth was deeper and darker than it first appeared. Grace looked at Hope and thoughtfully said, "We can close the case on paper, but it will haunt us for a long time. Until we catch everyone involved." "You're right," Hope replied. "This is just the beginning. The truth hidden in the shadows of corruption was still waiting for its moment." And although Missy Beaver's case was officially closed, it left many unanswered questions.